I think we're on. Thank you, Nilosh, on the technical side, and welcome everyone to Cyber Sangha, this space that was created by Tenzin Wangyal Rinpoche as a way to connect globally, to connect beyond the usual boundaries of geography. And actually, that he started this even much before COVID. So bow to him and to how he created this, to create these spaces of dialogue. And I'm really honored today to have three great people that I consider friends and teachers, and to discuss about mindful diplomacy, inner resources for global challenges. And I think it couldn't be more timely to have this dialogue with the changes that are happening, with all the difficulties in not only here in the US, but globally, and how human rights and diplomacy can really help for social transformation, dignity, care, connection, and how we can bring it into everyday life. Now, Mara and the group at the UN put together an event in December 10th, the Day for Human Rights, last year, called United and Present, Global Solutions from Within. And in that dialogue, in that 2-day event, I was only able to be there online, but two of the main speakers were actually Dr. Jon Kabat-Zinn and Dr. Rhonda Magee. And so I'll introduce all three of you because although you probably don't need introduction, it's a great honor to really share all who you are, at least in a few lines, although it never is enough. So I'll start with Jon. Jon Kabat-Zinn did his doctoral work in molecular biology at MIT with in the lab of Nobel laureate Salvador Luria, and is a professor of medicine emeritus at University of Massachusetts. He really became really well known as he brought mindfulness, where he founded the Center of Mindfulness in Medicine, Healthcare, and Society back in 1995. And back even in 1979, he wrote Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction. Well, he started this MBSR, the Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction Clinic, and he's the author of numerous great books on mindfulness that really forged this mindful revolution that is now. From Full Catastrophe Living, Wherever You Go, There You Are, Mindfulness for Beginning, Mindfulness Meditation for Pain Relief, which is when that book came out was the last time we had Jon here in Cyber Sangha. So it's great to have you here again. So thank you, Jon. Rhonda Magee is a professor emeritus and founding director of the Center of Contemplative Law and Ethics at the University of San Francisco, and the founder of Mount Iris Meditation Community, which is a meditation community dedicated to soul-hearted mindfulness for healing ourselves and transforming the world. She's a leading mindfulness teacher and practice innovator with a focus on applying mindfulness to the hardest challenges of our times. So she's a prolific author as well. She draws on law and legal history to weave storytelling, poetry, analysis, and practices into inspiration for changing how we think, act, and live better together in this rapidly changing world. Rhonda, welcome. And last but certainly not least, Mara Arizaga. Mara is the head of Wellbeing Unit at the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, where she led the Commissioner's Mindfulness Initiative, launched in 2021 to promote mindfulness practices and mental well-being across the UN system, and where now she leads the United and Present strategy, which aims to support the integration of well-being, presence, resilience, and inner capacities into institutional culture and multilateral work. So also, I have to say, she's Argentinian like me. We know each other for many years, and it's really great to have you here, Mara. Welcome. So, with this amazing panel, and with a little bit going back to December 10th last year as a starting point, Mara, if you want to tell us a little bit, I, I remember all the work that this took. If you can, say a little bit from your side, what was the inspiration and how did you actually make it happen and, bows to you.
Thank you so much, Ale, for that presentation. And it's really great and an honor to be here with this wonderful group of persons.
Mara, your Wi-Fi is.
And to start with,
let me see if I do something.
It's a bit of a miracle that happened, so I don't really know how that happened. Are you able to hear me? Can you tell me if you're able to hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you now, Mara.
We can hear you now.
Start over.
Yeah, start over. Otherwise, you can come here and you could do it from here, and we turn the mic off and on. So
great.
If you want,
okay.
If it doesn't work,
let's
come to
try
this
and
room.
let me know. Perfect. So if you can hear me now, I was saying that great. That it's really an honor to be here today with all of you, and also I would like to start by providing a little bit of a context of how that conference came into life last year. So from the UN Human Rights Office, the United Nations Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, over the last few years, we have been exploring how these inner capacities, presence, attention, of course, a mindful approach to the work that we implement, deep listening, silence even, and self-awareness can support those of our colleagues that are working in contexts that are really marked by human suffering, by complexity, by uncertainty, and now more than ever. So this is how the United and Present initiative came to life. And this is an initiative that really explores the link between human rights, collective well-being, and inner capacities. So it's really from the inner to the outward. And it's rooted very much in the reality of the work we do. So our colleagues at OACHR,
can I interrupt for a second?
Marked by conflict, by violence.
Ale, can I interrupt for a second?
Sure.
Her signal is not really strong, and I think if she can join you in that room where the signal is strong, because we don't want to get 80% of what Mara Lisa has to say. It's just not good enough.
I agree.
Okay.
Mara,
thank you.
Acá? Venite a este
And we could even start over if you need to do that from the point of view of like editing.
Mara, venite para acá.
Right. I'm going to move to the next room.
Yeah.
Perfect.
And sorry, everyone. We're with these, the benefits of internet and sometimes the difficulties. But we'll get that sorted out. And thank you, Jon. In the meantime, we can just breathe and be mindful that things happen. Venite acá y ponelo. Oh, haga la tuya.
Hi again. So basically what I was saying is that to provide a bit of a context of how this conference.
Okay.
Jon, we had a history of internet connection problems, my goodness. So I was just sharing a bit of the context of how this conference actually happened. And basically, this came out of an exploration that we are doing at the United Nations Human Rights Office, looking at what are the inner capacities that can support the implementation of the very important mandate that we have, which is to promote and to protect human rights for all, everywhere. And aware of the fact that most of the work that we do, and my colleagues do, is really done in contexts that are marked by suffering, by polarization, by violence, by internal displacement, by all type of sufferings that we can ever even, sometimes it's difficult to even imagine the amount of sufferings that my colleagues are exposed to. And in that context, the question is very simple. What are the inner capacities that can sustain the work we do? And from there, we also looked at the fact that the individual well-being is also, of course, very much linked to the collective well-being. How do we make this transition between individual presence and how that presence of an individual can impact the collective well-being of the communities that we work with? So this is sort of the beginning of a journey which somehow had a wonderful moment last year when we conveyed the United and Present Conference in December, and we had the honor to have Jon Kabat-Zinn coming and sharing his wisdom and his presence with us, and also Rhonda. And that was really, I would say, a milestone, because it was possibly the first time that we had a conference at the UN in a very symbolic space, actually looking at exactly that, looking at the inner capacities that can really improve and sustain this very important mandate that we have at the UN. At the time when the multilateral system is being attacked in many ways, and when there is growing mistrust among member states, when polarization is possibly higher than it has ever been, when we have multiple crises around the world. And so the question is, we have policies, we have an institution, we have structures, and we have been looking to the outside. For most of the time, we always look at how do we do to implement the mandate from an outer perspective. So this strategy, this work, really does this turning back and looking at the humans that actually are doing the work. And so this is perhaps a bit of the context of the conference. And just to say that in what is next, briefly to outline that the strategy United and Present has three main pillars. One is the training, so raising, capacity building for colleagues, for diplomats hopefully, and for the communities that we serve. And then it's also meant to be a platform for sharing the many resources that already exist out there in a way that is accessible and relevant and appropriate and free for anyone who needs these resources. And then the third pillar is, and this is really important, and it has given us a very good anchor for our work, which is everything that is around World Meditation Day. World Meditation Day was adopted by the General Assembly resolution 2 years ago, and so it marks 21st of December as the day to promote the benefits of meditation for mental health, well-being, and beyond. And so the work of United and Present is also linked to that, to promote them and to raise awareness of the importance of meditation, the benefits of meditation, in all the many ways meditation manifests across cultures and traditions, in a way that is also diverse and honors the traditions, and also takes from all the traditions in the world that practice meditation in various forms. So this is a bit of the context, and with that, I'll give you back.
Thank you, Mara. This is so wonderful, and actually, it's great that we're together. And yesterday, we were talking actually to one of the main persons who, from her Liechtenstein post, that she was able to support this World Meditation Day. So how wonderful. And we are here at a Mind and Life event talking about depolarization. So what crucial this topic is. So I'd like to move to Jon, if I may. And Jon, so many years ago, you realized the importance of meditation, and particularly kind of distilled into mindfulness and creating this mindfulness-based stress reduction, because you realized that connection and that importance. So if you want to, say kind of the motivation then, and how do you see it now in how it's increased as a kind of a mindful revolution, but also not so much on that, but like, what do you see now through this UN thing, how it's expanding, how do you feel with all this? Maybe a big question.
I like big questions. And it's just a delight to be with, the three of you together exploring this kind of issue. Can you hear me? Is my sound okay and everything's good? Okay. Well, it was a very seminal gathering, and really, I think, pioneering on the part of Mara Arizaga and her office, and the High Commissioner himself, Volker Turk, to basically invite people from all over to consider the potential power of inner transformation, along with the outer challenges that the UN is facing under increasingly difficult economic and also political and also just grossly colossal planetary changes that are going on. So this is kind of like what I call kind of all hands on deck moment on Spaceship Earth, whether we recognize it or not. And so this arising within the UN, especially in at its headquarters in Geneva, and the days that we spent together were really, I think, formative and seminal in featuring how cost-effective it is to actually mobilize interior resources along with whatever resources are available for dealing with the enormity of the suffering that is unfolding on planet Earth. And that suffering is also taking place, in the foreground, the background being enormous greed and hatred and delusion playing itself out, not just on personal and societal levels, but on governmental levels, with ever increasing generations of horrifyingly powerful weapons that are, just sort of trending in the direction of all we need is one big mistake, and then we'll wake up as a species, but it might be way too late. And so this is really a critical moment on planet Earth. And if you reflect back to what you said, Ale, about the unfolding of MBSR in the world, in some sense, mindfulness has been around for thousands of years. And what MBSR basically offered was the recognition that the words meditation and the words medicine come from the exact same root. And they have everything to do with cultivating deep interior resources for healing, for learning, for growing, for healing, and for transformation. And so the past 45 years, or close to 50 years now, with mindfulness-based stress reduction and mindfulness-based cognitive therapy and many, many other applications of mindfulness, not just in medicine and psychotherapy and neuroscience, but also in education and various other, in governing and various other kinds of, in law, even in the military, which, has a lot of contradictions associated with it, but potentially huge benefits, including peace, which is what the military is supposed to be all about. And so this is a kind of a phenomenon that is really impersonal. It doesn't have to do with me. It doesn't have to do with any kind of one figure. It doesn't have to do with MBSR. It has to do with the M, and the potential power of that M in various kinds of ways to heal the world in ways that optimize well-being for everybody and minimize harm. And the UN was actually formed, as I understand it, after World War II, so that there would not be a World War III. And that we would stop these kinds of forces from reaching the point where the only solution was to kill millions and millions of people, and then everybody'd feel okay. And Germany and the United States would be friends again. And Russia, look at Russia and the United States were friends. And, oh, well, first of all, Germany and Russia were friends, and Hitler and Stalin. So it's like, you know, just like at a certain point, we have to kind of not wake up just as one society, but as a global society, as a species, which our name reflects. So just to not go on for too long, I really feel like what your work is, you know, sort of highlighting at Garrison at the moment is really part of a confluence of multiple streams of wisdom traditions throughout the world, not just Buddhist, but deep wisdom traditions from every culture on planet Earth, and realizing that what we have in common is our common humanity. And that to other ourselves or to disregard each other in ways that dehumanize or depersonalize or criminalize other people as groups of, you know, of people for economic reasons, for power reasons, for whatever it is, in which we're seeing played out like nobody's business in the news every single day globally in many different places. Well, this is the diagnosis at the moment. The diagnosis is very, very problematic. But the prognosis, there's at least some degree of hope. And that's why I think what you're doing at Garrison, what the UN is doing, what Mara Arizaga is doing, what Rhonda Magee is doing, are all, in some sense, different energy streams that are coming together, not so much to define, well, what the next thing would be, but to actually inspire millions of other people to inquire, how can I contribute? And then the generativity and the imagination and the inclusivity, I have a deep faith that that will do all the work. So it would be really incorrect to, as people sometimes project onto me, that I actually brought mindfulness into the world and just, you know, transformed everything through that. It's like, this was actually the work of thousands and thousands of people and very devoted teachers and practitioners from multiple lineages who came together to do this kind of work. And that's kind of like just the kind of microcosm of what's possible if we do this on a global scale. And that's why I loved, the conference in Geneva at the UN, because the UN has the potential to actually reconnect to its roots with Dag Hammarskjöld and use whatever power it has, whatever influence it has, as a kind of Archimedes fulcrum to leverage the kind of transformations that we're talking about, not to kind of go back to the past, but to not let the future be so defined by technology and by AI and AGI and migration to Mars and mining the moon and all sorts of things that corporate interests might want to do with no regard for the costs or the pollution, the cost to the planet from extraction and exploitative practices at a colossal scale. And so the human mind and the human heart, I would say, are really up to the task. There's no question about it. And the question is, can we align ourselves in such a way that it's not about any individual me, but about a very, very collective we that transcends all sorts of boundaries.
Thank you, Jon. And particularly, this aspect of hope. I mean, sometimes we so much focus on the problem. And, even in medicine, as you were saying, meditation in medicine, we talk so much about pathology rather than the what's the healing side. So thank you for that.
And also, just to say, you can't be healthy in an unhealthy world. The air, the water, the food, the social context, all of that impacts health in gigantic ways that we now know and understand in a very deep way. And so that's kind of like our baseline now, is to use what we know to actually grow in just that kind of way.
Yeah. Rhonda, with all your work and also got there, I know it was a difficult journey, and but you were there, and it was so great that you were able to be there, and not only your presence and everything, your experience, if you can share some from your side.
Well, again, thank you. It's lovely to be here, and it was amazing to be with Mara and John, and also with you, Ale, kind of through the power of the internet in Geneva. Um, you know, as an American citizen, born here in the United States, a law professor for many years here in San Francisco, the birthplace of the United Nations. I was really, really excited to be in this beautiful convening with this singular and historic mission, right, to help us see more clearly at this time, leaning into mindfulness practices for collective discernment of how best to organize to address suffering, using, again, these institutions, including this very powerful institution, the United Nations. As one who has been working in institutional spaces for my career, career as a law professor, and before that, training as a military officer. It has really been on my heart and mind throughout my career to be a part of whatever movements might be arising that could deeply address at maybe the root levels the sources of the suffering that can lead to so much conflict and war. So when I learned that the United Nations was involved in this mindfulness effort, it just completely filled my heart with joy and with excitement, because to me, this has tremendous potential. Being there affirmed that excitement was well placed. There were so many people from really, the global South, from Africa, from Europe, and from the United States, from really all of these different cultures, backgrounds, who were bringing their unique medicine, right? Leaning into meditation, again, as Mara says, from these different backgrounds and approaches. As I think about what it really did for me, it really kind of, I think, again, affirmed the value of what we have been trying to do in bringing meditation into law in the United States. And there has been a network of folks who have been on that journey, bringing law into higher education generally, so not only law, right? And into the science through which we are obviously remaking the world. It is not easy, though, to continue this journey because, as we all know, the efforts that we are about do portend profound change. These practices that many of us are drawing on have been advertised, and so it's, we have to check this out for ourselves. But what we are leaning into when we engage in these historic practices from these many different traditions are ways of being in the world that deepen our capacity to live more fully who we are as manifestations of life on the planet, in the cosmos at this time. And so there's always the possibility for true awakening to a new sense of who we are, let's say separately and together. And again, I'm using these concepts. We know that as we really, really see who we are, that those boundaries between the ways we think of ourselves as separate, the way we think of our nations as separate, all of those things can in particular ways be called into some kind of wise questioning. And holding complexity, right, is, I think, one of the biggest inner capacities that is being developed, that we can hold the complexity, that we can say, yes, there are these nation states and individual identities that are meaningful as agentic aspects of what it means to be alive, right? We can do these things separately and together because of these concepts of the individual and the nation. And we can see that those concepts don't tell the whole story. And these individual bodies are also radically interconnected, always influencing each other, always being impacted by the contexts, the environments, the ecologies that we are a part of. And, if we are really, really integrating what we now know, what the science, physics, astrophysics, all of these beautiful disciplines tell us, we know that what it means to be alive is actually much bigger than what we have often been given to see. And so when I think about that conference and what you are doing, Mara, and what the UN is helping us to encourage, it is about, yes, meeting the suffering right now in the individuals who are engaged in conflict management and resolution. And indeed, way back when I was a graduate student in sociology before becoming a law professor, I was studying how we resolve conflict. So to know that we are now at this point bringing these inner and outer practices together is really, really wonderfully exciting. But I do believe that these practices are inviting us into even more, right? Even more than healing ourselves as we go in the context that we've inherited. This is a moment, as Jon said, this is a all hands on deck moment where we are in the midst of a new level of a kind of a catechism or teaching about impermanence. Everything is, in fact, changing around us. We can be a part of those changes. We can, through these practices, do what we can to collectively engage in sort of bending the arc of change, or moving the engines of change in a positive direction, because, beautiful ones, we know that changes can be many multiple directions, and there not always for the better. So I'm really, really, really inspired by this effort, because I can think of no better way for us to do this really challenging work of holding reality rightly, seeing its complexity, seeing how we get caught, how even mindfulness practitioners can get caught in greed, hatred, and delusion, and really, really deepening our capacity for a kind of, this is to me the big koan, humility and awe, right? To kind of do what we can from the perspective of the awesome sense of us being agents of life, but also to have a certain humility so that we respect every agent of life, every other human being in the more than human world. And so this, I think, is what feels inspirational as we move forward.
Thank you, Rhonda. Thank you. And one of the things that, also growing up, seeing the United Nations very idealistically, but also kind of now seeing in that event online, seeing, as you were saying, Rhonda, how many participants from all different countries, but also there was that beautiful event of all different religions. And Mara, if you want to say a little bit about just how many countries were represented, how many religions, because it was, as Jon was highlighting, it's not just about Buddhism, it's about meditation, whether you call it meditation, you call it mindfulness. In all different traditions, there's this way of this spiritual way of coming together. So if you want to share a little bit about the participants there.
So, yes, indeed. And I think that's one of the most beautiful aspects of the United Nations, which really represents all members of this human family. And it really came to be as part of the highest ideals that humanity was able to somehow agree on. I really believe that the foundational documents of the United Nations are extremely visionary. And very possibly today, I'm not sure they will be agreed upon. So based on that, I think for what is really important, and that's really reflected in the World Meditation Day resolution, is that meditation is a universal practice, as we said before. And there was this panel indeed that honored different traditions. In that panel we have a rabbi, a Catholic priest, a Swami, a Tibetan monk, a Buddhist monk. We had also representatives of the evidence-based science, Western traditions, and Mark Williams was there in that panel. And it's really interesting enough, after that panel, we had a soft inauguration of the meditation room at the main headquarters of the UN in Geneva. There is a small room, it's a small space above the General Assembly room in Geneva, in the Palais des Nations, the headquarters. And that opening of that space was also highly symbolic. And it was opened through the blessings of these various traditions. Jon was also there as part of the ones blessing the space. And I think opening those type of spaces, though it's a small place, as I say, also have a very important weight, and they represent something very universal. The fact that we all benefit from having a moment of silence, a moment of going back to ourselves before we take important decisions in this particular context, in the middle of negotiations that take place all the time, when, as we were discussing yesterday, sometimes member states, when drafting a resolution, can be stuck for hours, for the whole night, discussing one word of that resolution, or whether to put a comma or not to put a comma in the resolution. So how important it is in that particular space to be able to come back to oneself, to be able to come back to silence, to stillness, in the deepest sense of what that means, and also how relevant it is to think that for many, many years we didn't think of this into this multilateral context. We didn't have a formal way of looking at the importance of looking back. States are reducing their contributions to the United Nations, and a body that is meant for global peace, and instead giving more money to military efforts. There is where we see, okay, we really need to do something in that regard, in looking back and looking at what are the foundations for peace. And I think this is where the foundations for peace are found. And this is why this is particularly relevant. And just on your question again on how this panel came to life, basically the resolution and the report that we published. Last year we published a report that is called The Universality of Meditation. And that report it was drafted with contributions from member states from all over the world and from various traditions that actually share with us how in the respective cultures and traditions they find ways to meditate. And we had contributions from indigenous peoples, we had contributions from all traditions of the world, as Jon was saying. This is a universal practice. And that universality is what we want to highlight and promote from the UN level.
Wonderful. And when we'll put up the recording of this, we'll also share the link to that article. Rhonda, at one point you mentioned barriers, and of course many times we get stuck in the barriers, but lately even in research we have this word PTG, right? Post-traumatic growth. And what we're seeing when we see in behavioral research in this area, including meditation, mindfulness, yoga, is that if you have a trauma, when we do these introspective practices at the beginning, it might actually be more clear. But then if we use this constantly, if we have this as a tool, there's what we call post-traumatic growth. So we go beyond it and we actually flourish, right? So what are the barriers and what are the opportunities in this, that you see as from here as a post-traumatic growth, if I may, in that way or in other ways that you want to talk about it? I see
Yeah.
Rhonda, so you take it because I see you're nodding, so you're go for it.
Yes, maybe just a few words in response to your good question there. I will say I, just as an individual, have experienced quite a lot of trauma in sort of research terms. I'm a child survivor of many, many ACEs, right? These childhood traumatic experiences that nevertheless I managed to somehow personally overcome to get me here. So I'm a person who, from my own experience of the kinds of things that many children experience, impoverishment, parents without very much in the way of education, abuse in the home, etc. There were many things, as well as now I look back and realize environmental. We were kind of in a flood. I grew up in a floodplain. So I grew up in a place where we were early victims of the destabilizing climate and the effort to conquer it through pesticides, right? So there was a lot of things that if I look at my history, I think all of us look back in our history, many of us overcome a lot already. So as we lean into these practices for right now, looking at how it is that we can transform, notwithstanding the challenges, how there can be growth. And I'm one of those people who will talk about the hope that comes from really looking at how it is that, again, this is not to be Pollyanna about suffering. This is not to suggest that, I'd love it if from henceforth there was never another child who suffered in any of the kinds of ways that I've been pointing to, including war and other ways that have not been a feature of my experience, immigration, migration challenges, etc. I do think that the differential ways, the ways that organized power can sometimes be a part of what we're also confronted by and might need to see more clearly, is again a barrier perhaps to maybe maximizing our potential for peace at this time. But I do think that potential for peace is always present. And I do think that these practices, if we can, become even more, let's say, hungry for practices that even mean dealing with our difficult emotions, our fear, right? The different ways that any one of us is tempted in the face of the threats, what feel like threats to our ultimate well-being, not just our income and our jobs and these kinds of things, which can feel very threatened right now, right? With AI and with climate and migration patterns war being what it is. There are real existential anxieties that people are feeling. So there's the ever-present fear of death that all humans feel. But I think we're in a period where there's such radical uncertainty that if we can't really deepen the kind of hunger and thirst for applying these practices to address those really the hardest dimensions of what suffering can look like, how any of these sufferings can lead us into those, down those rabbit holes of real fear and despair. If we can really deepen our courage for applying these practices to address those, then all kinds of possibilities can emerge, because we actually are much more capable. I mean, my own history and others here will help us verify. We are capable of coming through, as my grandmother would have said, of making a way out of no way, right? Of like actually coming through the other side of these difficulties. But really discerning not just the individual, but the collective ways that we are up against the manufacture of fear, the manufacture of confusion and delusion, actually the manufacture of misrepresentations of what is happening. And so all of these things are in the way, but we can, through these practices, I think, see more clearly and then organize and collectively address them, just as the United Nations has always been a part of.
Thank you, Rhonda. Jon, you had spoken of hope, and I think, again, in the face of challenges, how these practices can be helpful to grow and flourish. And you have done collaborated a number of studies about this flourishing. If you want to say some of that and how you see the flourishing, even in the midst of all the challenges that we are facing now. You muted.
I think if people do internet studies of the frequency of words used on the internet with Google, flourishing is one that's going exponential at the moment because it has a very inclusive kind of tone to it. Richie Davidson, our colleagues Richie Davidson and Cortland Dahl just wrote a book on flourishing that really is very powerful and includes awareness as the first principle of 4. And just to be clear, when we're talking about mindfulness, we're talking about awareness, human awareness. There's no difference. There's no daylight between them. So mindfulness is not something you get. Mindfulness is something you are born with. Every single person is born with human awareness. But what we don't have is access to it on a regular basis when we need it. And I think there's no question that the Buddha's diagnosis from 2,600 years ago is more accurate today than it was when he offered it, and that is greed, hatred, and delusion, which is all really driven by the misunderstanding of what it means to be alive and to be a quote unquote self. So when you privilege yourself rather than seeing yourself as part of a much larger interconnected whole, then you basically are, in some sense, setting yourself up to be driven by more for me, and if you get in my way, then you are a threat to me. And I think this is happening on a global level. And Yuval Noah Harari, this great historian, makes the wonderful point that all of this really comes from the human capacity to tell ourselves stories. And that, this is the story, so to speak, of humanity on planet Earth, is we learn to even talk to each other. I mean, no one knows how language came about, never mind mindfulness, never mind awareness. That all of a sudden, apes started actually saying, if we got together and we all sort of charged this woolly mammoth from one side towards the cliff, we'd have food for the winter, for everybody. Well, animals other than human beings don't seem to be able to do that kind of thing in numbers up to, say, 100 people can coordinate in that kind of a way. Humans can do that. So how big a story are we willing to tell ourselves about planet Earth and our belonging, and the fact that we're not the sort of dominant species on planet Earth, which was, the sort of biological story of like, well, humans are the top of the evolutionary tree. But now we're understanding that, no, there's no tree, actually. It's a totally interconnected network, spherical network, and it is actually planet Earth, Gaia, so to speak, so that we depend on, sort of the plankton in the ocean, in every cubic centimeter of ocean, providing half of the oxygen for planet Earth, to say nothing of the rainforest, the lungs of planet Earth. And that was not understood 100 years ago. Now it's understood. And so when we see what's happening to the rainforest, we're actually humanity out of economic need. I want to grow my cattle in the Amazon. and I'm going to clear cut the Amazon so that we can grow cattle and have, successful ranching industry. Well, that may be all very good for the ranchers and even for people who are going to eat the beef, but not if we, basically eviscerate our lungs. So it comes down again to what kind of stories are we willing to actually entertain about how amazing this species is, but also how completely integrated it is with all other species. And, that we need to actually honor life on Earth in a new way, because this is the only place in the known by us universe where there is life. And while it's nice to talk about going to the moon or, a few billionaires going on to Mars, this is the only planet at the moment that has the life that we know of anywhere in the, boundless, endless universe. And so how we transcend the greed, hatred, and delusion and the selfing motivation and is really huge. But we have every indication that it's a love affair. It's not a combat. It's a love affair with what's deepest and best in human beings. And we've been seeing it on multiple levels everywhere. Now we're seeing it in the mindfulness and sustainability movement. That mindfulness, like, sort of sustainable development goals, for instance, that's all very fine. But what about inner sustainability? What about inner developmental goals? And so there are research papers and all sorts of collaborations and all sorts of wonderful annual meetings and so forth that bringing together people around the world in this process of like waking each other up by looking deeply into what's possible. Why should cities be centers of poverty and want when we can create cities where everybody can benefit and it will actually cost less and be less energetic, and where, to use a biological metaphor, if your body, which has unimaginable trillions of cells associated with it, if there even a few of those cells don't get an adequate blood supply, oxygen supply, they will necrose. And that could actually end the life of the entire organism. So it's kind of obvious that at this particular point in the economic development of planet Earth, that we can't have a global South that's impoverished because of the history of the global North, and that we have to have some kind of deep recognition and then realization of a kind of whatever the solution is in terms of a universal, basic income for all people on planet Earth and adequate to the challenges that they face in the environments that they live in. And right. There's plenty of money for that. There's plenty of money for that. If we, there seem to be plenty of money for data centers, endless money for data centers that are going to heat the planet and pollute all the water and heat the water. But we do have that capacity. And I think so we need to tell ourselves bigger stories. And that's, I think, what we're doing. And that's not a kind of non-meditative invention, that this is part of the story of meditation, is that meditation is really understanding that everybody's true nature is in some sense a reflection of the insane beauty, and we often use the word sacred in that context, the insane beauty of life on Earth. Everybody, no exceptions. And then we need to create laws that allow us to govern ourselves, which is the deep root meaning of the word dharma, in such a way to recognize that sometimes people do harm each other, and we have to create laws to not allow that and to sort of sequester people who, until they learn how to do that. But there are ways to do that that are, and they're experimenting with them in Finland and other places where even the prisons can be much more human than they are now. But what about teaching kids in school how to stay out of prison by honoring them in certain ways that doesn't happen in schools? So the potential creativity is enormous. The cost is actually infinitesimal compared to the cost of the money that we're throwing at artificial intelligence. And maybe what we really need to ask ourselves is the kind of deep Zen koan of, is there intelligent life on planet Earth, period? Is there intelligent life on planet Earth? Because if we annihilate ourselves or create a super intelligence that has no more use for human beings, how intelligent is that?
Thank you. And what's the story that we're going to continue? So I wondered, as we close, Mara, what are there next steps from the UN's perspective on this?
This is uncharted territory. So we are learning as we walk. That's what I can say. On practical terms, perhaps just to say that we will launch very soon a call for contributions for the second report. And I hope that we get contributions from all of you as well. And that the idea is really to continue exploring this very important question of what are the inner capacities that are needed for the very important mandate that the United Nations has been tasked with. So it's really an open charter, and as Jon said, I think the possibilities are many, are infinite, I will say.
Thank you. So could we close with a meditation, Jon? Can I ask you to
Sure.
lead us in a meditation that we all share together?
And I don't usually do this, but the impulse just arrived to actually focus on joy. Because the topic itself has the potential to sort of slide us into a kind of a certain kind of existential despair, because seen through one lens, it doesn't look good for humanity, and and there is so much suffering, and at the same time, it's so important for us to remember the beauty in life. If you have children, if you are, if you have grandchildren, if you have parents, if you have friends, if you have lovers, this is not like you should feel guilty about that because the world is crying. No, this is kind of one of the paradoxes, is that we need to actually live the joy, live the awe, live the beauty, and let it be contagious. Let our joy and our presence and our love be contagious. So let me suggest in the last few minutes that we take our seats, as those of you who are meditators do this all the time. But how often do you actually take your seat as a radical act? As opposed to, oh yeah, now I'm supposed to sit on my cushion, as a habit. No, it's not a habit. Every moment is like priceless. And there's only this moment. There is no other moment. So when you come to take your seat in this moment, let it be 100% and give yourself over to the awareness that's never not here. That's actually your birthright and more who you are than any thought or story that you might be telling yourself. And allow it to be, or experiment with it being a radical act of sanity. Just to stop for a moment and drop beneath all of the turbulence, the waves on the surface of the ocean that's sometimes so incredibly tumultuous, given the topics we've been talking about just in the past hour. And just let those waves be as they are, because it's the nature of the mind to wave, and for good reason, and to feel all sorts of emotions. But let's drop down a little bit below the surface of the heart and mind, and into this vast ocean of awareness that really, as I was saying, is our birthright, that nobody is born without awareness. But we don't necessarily know how to access it and actually let it become our permanent address in this only timeless present moment that's now. So this is a super radical act, whether you wind up sitting for 1 minute by the clock, or 1 hour by the clock, or 1 day by the clock. It's not about how long, it's about how awake. So letting it be a radical act of both sanity and love to take your seat in this way. And of course, in a guided meditation, the person who's doing the guidance tends to talk. But you have to hear the talk as kind of like fingers pointing beyond the finger. The classical thing being, don't mistake the finger pointing to the moon. Look at the moon. So can you actually bring awareness to your awareness? And a good place to start would be the carriage of the body. Can you sit in a posture that embodies your own beauty as a human being, your own colossal dignity, and all of the ancestors standing behind you, way past the ones you would ever be able to name, for thousands of years, whose lives were absolutely necessary for the genes to come together in the form of you right here, right now. And then just drop below even that thought and just rest. Take up residency in awareness. Which becomes commensurate with or congruent with silence, wakefulness, kindfulness, heartfulness, compassion, inwardly, outwardly, just this moment. Colored, of course, by all the moments that have come before, but also open, free, full of possibility. Just this moment, just this sitting here, just this love affair, just this being human, as Rumi says in the guest house. Just this. Just this. And you might remind yourself that as we open our eyes, if your eyes have been closed, or move on once this is finished and you are facing the next moment in your life, remembering the just this. It will remind you, it will rebody you, it will reconnect you to your own belonging, your own dignity, your own beauty, and boundless possibilities of embodied wakefulness and love, none of which has anything to do with thought to a first approximation. Thought may be a real superpower, it certainly is, but awareness is a superpower of infinitely more greater dimensionality. And it's trustworthy, it's the same as mindfulness, it's the same as heartfulness, and it's already yours. So, although this is coming to an end, the practice never comes to an end because it's completely congruent with life itself. And the idea is to fall awake while there's still time and live an awakened life. And as Thoreau once observed in Walden, his narration of his time at Walden Pond, not when you come to die, he said, discover that you hadn't lived. This is it. And it's such an honor to be in conversation with all of you. I mean, it really is not just a love affair to sit on your cushion, but to be engaged in the world, to take even one breath, to hug even one person, a child or a grandchild or a friend or a stranger, and to honor the legacy and the vision of the UN and its founding charter, which is, as Mara Lisa said, an extraordinary document that needs to be reaffirmed over and over and over again in each generation. This is really an opportunity to not lose our minds and our integrity when we most need them, and in the form of every single person on planet Earth, and even more beings, because let's not forget the rhinoceroses and the whales and mountain gorillas and and the cockroaches even and the paramecia, and we could go on, but just an absolute honor to be with all of you, and I'll sign off now and turn it back over to you,
Thank you, John.
Ale.
Thank you. It was great, beautiful. As you said, this fall awake, this love of life, even in this difficult time. And so, thank you, John. Thank you, Rhonda. Thank you, Milos. Thank you, Polly, everyone who's behind Cyber Sangha. Thank you, Tenzin Wangyal Rinpoche. And again, until next, keep on reminding ourselves that each one can do a little bit for a better world. Thank you so much.
Mwah.
Ah.
So sweet.